Scripture readings today is Luke 24, 36 through 49. And I thought I could read the large print without these, but I can't. So, while they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see. For a ghost does not have flesh or bones, as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. Yet for all their joy they were still disbelieving and wondering. And he said to them, I lost my place. Disbelieving. And he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it, and he ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understanding the Scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, and see, I am sending upon you what my Father promised, to stay here in the city until you have been clothed with the power from on high." This is the word of the Lord.
And thanks be to God.
Peace be with you. Yes, we will be talking about everybody's favorite or least favorite portion of worship, depending on our personality. If you were wondering, the passing of the peace is one of the oldest practices. It is one of the most cherished traditions of the church. I loved reminding the worshipers when I worked at Ghost Ranch, especially at family camp. There's always some siblings who would not shake each other's hand. That the one of the traditions from the earliest church was also giving the kiss of peace. But I would also mention right afterwards that simply extending the right hand of fellowship was acceptable. This is usually when the reluctant brothers and sisters would shake, typically Parisian style, of just one firm handshake. No more, no less. But one of our modern understandings of peace comes from a Nobel Peace Prize winner from the last century. Back when the Nobel Prize actually meant something, it is ironic that some of the modern winners who have later gone on to see the escalation of war on other countries, or some cases, even those leaders who have won peace prizes in the past were unable to stop ethnic or religious mass murder in their countries. Yet back in the day, kind of an American winner, Martin Luther King Jr., would frame peace as his famous quote of that was, "Peace is not the absence of conflict, but rather the presence of understanding and justice." Peace was simply just we were not fighting, but rather that we understood that there was understanding and justice involved. We can see how Martin Luther King got that definition by the example of the risen Christ in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus Christ appears in the midst of his disciples who have just heard the testimony of three groups. Remember that we have heard from the women from the tomb. We have heard that Peter has also seen the empty tomb as well. And we have just had the return of the disciples who have gone all the way to Emmaus, that were able to run all the way back and to tell the disciples in the upper room and give their testimony. The risen Christ, after entering the room by mysterious ways, greets them in peace and spends time to really kind of calm them down. It turns out people, even the disciples, after hearing three witnesses say that Jesus is around, still they kind of believe that, folks don't just randomly show up when they are dead. And it turns out even the disciples are a little bit frightened at that. And it is disturbing enough. Maybe sometimes we encounter this at night in kind of the world of dreams. Maybe we'll see a long-lost loved one, maybe a friend we haven't seen in years. And sometimes that can even be disturbing to us. I know I've had that kind of dream before. But the disciples are sitting there talking to a dead guy in the flesh. And more importantly, as kind of the rise of zombies and all that other in pop culture, it is real interesting to kind of see their reaction. In fact, they first kind of think he is a spirit. Some texts even say that he is a ghost. But the risen Christ kind of explains that he is not a ghost. He has a wounded hands. He has pierced feet. And Christ offers them to see and touch his body. And he is helping them to understand the teachings that he has given them. In fact, he goes on to quote kind of Moses and open their minds to the scriptures. But what is not said and implied, though, in the appearance of Jesus Christ, is also that matter of justice that Martin Luther King says undergirds real peace. Jesus' disciples, even the Roman centurion overseeing his death, knows that Jesus was a righteous person. Christ in returning is showing that the ultimate justice of God, that God was not going to let injustice be the last word for his Son. And this will also have reverberations throughout the Roman Empire and throughout all time. Now, there's also something interesting about this particular Sunday. You may have noticed or maybe have checked it out on social media, but some people are calling this Star Wars Sunday. Now, I think I'm required to mention this because my father took my uncle to Star Wars probably half a dozen times in 1977. And when Lucasfilm released kind of the remastered versions in the 1990s, my dad took my brother and I to the theater, and we soon discovered it was kind of a reunion, as some of his former co-workers from Iowa who had seen the original in 1977, they had brought their own teenage sons and daughters, and we were all watching it together in theaters in the 1990s. So if you're wondering why it is also called Star Wars Sunday, and I think I'm maybe not required, but I think I have to at least pretend that I can offer everybody kind of a greeting. May the 4th be with you. Yeah, every 7 years when it happens on Sunday, ministers will do that. Sorry about that. But I also have to make a mandatory Star Wars reference. And that is in Star Wars Episode 3, which was just re-released 2 weekends ago for the 20th anniversary. There is a scene where kind of the evil emperor states at the end of kind of this monologue that we shall have peace. And it's weird that kind of this evil emperor is stating that his game or his kind of aim is to have peace. And he says, we shall have peace. Now, what he means by that is that he and his evil apprentice, Darth Vader, will kill all their enemies, all their rivals, anyone who gets in their way. And when the opposition is eliminated, they will rule unopposed. The evil emperor is offering a type of peace. Now, Star Wars is fiction, but a long time ago, actually in our galaxy, actually in our world, yet far, far away in Rome, the emperors called and promoted themselves as bringers of peace. In fact, the time when our story takes place, historians kind of call that era the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, because the Mediterranean world was under the rule of Rome, under the rule of the emperors, and lived in relative peace, notwithstanding the way that peace was maintained, which if you were here for kind of our Good Friday celebration, it's maintained by terror and death, and kind of this promise of force kept everybody in line. In fact, Jesus himself was kind of a victim of this as he was executed by the Roman legions under Roman law for supposedly saying that he was king of the Jews, and so was seen as a rival to the emperor in Rome. Now, Augustus Caesar was the first emperor, and among his titles was the Prince of Peace, because Augustus ended/won a Roman civil war which had lasted about 3 generations. And he, like the emperor, evil emperor in Star Wars, declared that we shall have peace and made it a thing. But the risen Christ in that upper room is extending or giving peace to his disciples. A true peace, one that is not merely the absence of conflict, but will give the world a better understanding and a better way of life. Contrast this to the peace that the emperor promises. And throughout the first couple hundred years, many Christian martyrs would confess Christ as the Prince of Peace, and they would refuse to swear or sacrifice to the emperor. And the results were the same as with Jesus. When his disciples would move into new places, spread the good word, the peace they possessed looked very different from the peace that the emperor offered. In addition, it also undermines your title as the Prince of Peace when the emperor is running around, or in the name of the emperor, is running around and killing innocent Christians for simply declaring that the emperor was not God. Now, everybody knew in that time that the emperor was not divine. They tended to die just like every other person in the world. But the Christians' willingness to hold on to that truth made their neighbors curious, and many times we would see the faith would kind of grow as persecutions would come and go and eventually pass. And it was interesting because people would be drawn to the Christians, see how we treated widows and orphans, see how we taught, see how we lived. And they were also wondering that these people would stick to the truth that everybody knew was false, that they would tell the truth that the emperor was not God, that God is God, that Christ is the Prince of Peace, and that the Spirit can change lives. So throughout the generations, the church grew in Rome and eventually supplanted and became the state religion of the emperor, or more accurately, the emperor's mother. And so they would change the face of the earth. Now, another reason we really love this story is even when the disciples are in disbelief, even though the disciples have a lack of understanding, even in many ways they cannot understand what is going on, they cannot believe their eyes, but yet they are all filled with joy. Likewise, in this world where we don't always understand, or perhaps we see too much the injustice in life, where we can see evil around us, we know that all that is wrong and all that is bad, that it will not be the last word, that Christ has the final say, and Christ will not be separated us whether in life or in death, because even today we are his disciples. Pretty soon we will share in the sacrament of communion. We will remember that we are Christ's friends. We who are baptized, those of us who have struggled with faith, those of us who have a load of care on our shoulders, whether it be from grief, whether it be our health, we know that we can be united with Christ who carries the load of the whole world for us. All we have to do is trust. All we have to do is share in this sacrament. And sometimes when we even have to share with folks who don't always show up on time, that we are united with folks who don't always believe unless they have to see it for themselves. And so next week we'll be talking about Thomas, who in John's gospel did not make the meeting in the upper room, which as Presbyterians, that is almost the worst thing you can do.